So the PBA just released their own top 25 players of all time? Well, not really. It's the top 25 of the last 25, and it uses some metrics that I have used similarly in the past. Now, this video is a little bit of a filler, but I promise it will be just as entertaining as all of my other videos, just a little more commentary focused and a little bit less scripted. But anyways, let's get into it. So first of all, they released their 25 players of the last 25 years, and it's a pretty impressive piece of work. They took the last 25 years of bowling history and created a pretty objective system to rank the best players of the era. The results are pretty accurate, and it gives us a real framework for discussing greatness in bowling. But like any ranking, it's got quirks. Some players benefit from how the points were structured, others got penalized, and understanding why the rankings look the way they do helps us appreciate what greatness in the PBA looks like. So let me break it down, explain the rankings, explain the point system, and talk about what this tells us about measuring greatness in bowling. So here's the list. I'll put it up on screen and scroll down as I go, but first of all, let's look at the top 5. At 5, we've got Walter. At 4, we've got Chris Barnes. At 3, we've got Norm Duke. At 2, you've got EJ Tackett. And at number 1, to no surprise, in the 2025 through 2000 season, Jason Belmonte was the greatest player of this era. That is no surprise to anybody, I think. But to really understand the rankings and what the points actually mean, let me break it down for you. So basically, you would get 1 point per top 5 finish in a single standard title event. You'd get 2 points for a top 5 finish in a major title event, 5 points per standard, 7.5 per major title, and 15 points for player of the year. Now this is important because that will matter a little bit later and why it could be a little bit biased, but overall I think this is a pretty solid framework. It rewards winning at the end of the day, which of course is the primary measure of greatness. It weighs major championships more heavily than standard titles, acknowledging that the biggest stages matter the most. It heavily values Player of the Year, showing season-long excellence, and it also gives a little bit of credit to consistency through those top 5 finishes. The best part about this ranking is that it's pretty much as objective as you can get. No voting bias, no political for or against players. Your achievements speak for themselves. If you've won titles, finished in the top 5, you rank high. If you don't, you don't. Simple as that. But a slight issue is that it doesn't value hot streaks or efficiency like a player subjective ranking might. But what I think they got absolutely perfect is Jason Belmonte at number 1 and EJ Tackett at number 2. Both of these players have had their entire career, so it makes sense that they rank high. Belmo had his 15 majors, 7 player of the years, 17 standard titles, 72 top 5 finishes, 38 major top 5s, and just overall, his dominance over the past 16 years is unmatched in bowling history, except for possibly Earl Anthony with his huge peak and Walter Ray with his longevity. But the point of this video is not to talk about the GOAT debate yet again, it's to talk about this ranking and why I think it's good or bad. And yet again, EJ Tackett at number 2 with 20 standard titles, 7 majors, 4 Player of the Year awards in his short career makes total sense. He joined the tour halfway and still completed achievements that dwarf most people's entire careers, even some of the people that are on this list, or ones that made honorable mention. And overall, the whole top 10 is pretty much as expected. Norm Duke, Barnes, Walter Ray, Tommy Jones, Sean Rash, Simonson, Koivuniemi, Bill O'Neill. These are some of the best bowlers of this era, and seeing them ranked this way confirms what most people already thought. The inclusion of consistency through those top 5 finishes is also amazing. Chris Barnes ranks just 4th despite only having 3 majors. That doesn't really make sense unless you look at the big picture with his 100 total top 5 finishes, which leads the PBA overall. That level of sustained excellence over 2 decades deserves slightly more recognition than it does, and that's even more impressive when you realize that Chris Barnes hasn't really been on TV all that often since about 2020. Now, let's talk about probably one of the more controversial parts. The system gives 7.5 points for a major versus 5 points for a standard title, which is a 1.5x multiplier. This feels about right when you look at the results it produces, and funnily enough, this was actually higher than the ratio I was criticized for using in my GOAT debate video where I tried to equalize titles upon eras just to make it a little bit more fair for Belmo and Earl. And because of this, Anthony Simonson ranks 8th with 5 majors and 11 standard titles. His major success, particularly in the USBC Masters, elevates his ranking quite a bit despite him being way younger and having way less time than some of the other people. Walter Ray Williams Jr. is an interesting case at number 5, because he turned 40 before the year 2000. A good amount of his score comes from 6 majors, which were all after the year 2000, which give him a significant boost in the point totals. And although he wasn't as dominant past the year 2000 as he was in the 90s, Walter still kept going, and he should get proper credit for what he did. Because considering how many people tend to fall off towards their 40s, 50s, Walter just kept chugging and managed to end up top 5 despite barely bowling on TV past around 2018 or so. This multiplier also separates players with similar career paths. Dom Barrett and Jesper Svensson, for example, both have strong careers with multiple titles, but Barrett's 3 majors versus Svensson's 2 creates some separation between them in the rankings. You could argue for a 2x multiplier instead of a 1.5, but I feel like that would change rankings in a way that's not too great. For example, Belmo would heavily benefit from titles counting double. But overall, it's a good balance, but I think it could be toned down to maybe 1.25x instead of 1.5, but that's just my opinion. Now, Player of the Year awards are worth 15 points, and that might seem like a little bit of a stretch, but it actually makes sense given what it represents. It's Player of the Year. It's season-long dominance, not just one tournament performance. Winning Player of the Year typically means you won multiple titles, finished top 5 a good amount of times, and outperformed everyone else for an entire season. It's mostly by points after all. And this 15-point value creates some meaningful separation between players with similar accomplishments. For example, Patrick Allen and Parker Bone III both have 2 majors and over 10 standard titles, and they also have very similar top 5 finishes. But the Player of the Year awards separate them from the people who just had majors or just had titles overall. So overall, this does represent the people who tried to compete across the entire 25-year window, and that's pretty good. But overall, that's just kind of a consequence of what this ranking is in the first place. Sustained excellence for 2 decades is impressive, and it deserves recognition even if you were a player who just had a hot streak and burnt out for the most part. Chris Barnes ranks 4th, partially because he competed at a high level from 2000 through 2020. That consistency for over 2 decades represents something pretty valuable that the system should reward more. Showing up and competing year after year matters a lot. And overall, I think the players who ranked the highest generally earned it through their performance over time, although the top 2 is partially a contradiction of that. Sean Rash at 7 with 206 compiled through 80 top 5 finishes and titles across multiple decades. Again, showcasing that placing high is also about longevity and not a peak season. But cutting off in the year 2000 does create some interesting situations. Walter Ray ranks 5th despite the fact that his age would be about 40 to 65 years. If you redid this to include the 90s into the current season, there's a solid chance he would be at number 1. Jason Couch is also caught in the crossfire, being at 19th, capturing the tail end of his career after the Tournament of Champions three-peat. They acknowledge this in the article itself, noting that it interrupts the prime of Couch's career, but needing a clean 25-year window for the anniversary makes a lot of sense. Fagan is a bubble player in this list, and he has 69 points, and that's pretty fascinating because he left the tour 15 years into this window to pursue business. His 2 majors and 3 standard titles would normally rank higher, but leaving mid-career meant fewer top 5s, so the system did not reward him. Doug Kent also faces a similar fate despite having 3 majors and a Player of the Year award because he stepped away after 2009. Had he continued, even at a fraction of his prime, he might have cracked the top 5 through top 5 finals. But again, a system cannot objectively rank potential compared to what's actually happened. Consistency through longevity and top 5 finishes makes this system a lot better. For example, Chris Barnes in his TV struggles notoriously contributed to his career not being as great as it probably could have if he just stepped up a little more. But say what you will about lost potential or not good enough, whatever, he still had 100 top 5 finishes. That is incredible. That contributed a whole 100 points to his total. That consistency over 2 decades is still incredibly impressive, and the system rewards it appropriately without letting it override his 14 standard titles and 3 majors. This ranking is very interesting because it also highlights the passing of the torch in bowling. The top 4 highlights 2 players who were established before 2000 and 2 who emerged during this era, Belmonte and Tackett. That balance feels appropriate for that 25-year retrospective. In the middle of the ranking shows the bridging generation with Tommy Jones, Sean Rash, and Bill O'Neill, who competed through a bit of both eras. Their rankings reflect successful adaptation across different competitive landscapes and equipment evolutions. The lower end of that top 25 includes some newer stars like Kyle Troop, Jesper Svensson, and Chris Prather, who are still accumulating their achievements. And to be honest, if this ranking were made in about 10 years from now, their ranking would probably be significantly higher. However, it doesn't really capture the era debate as well as it could, because a lot of older players had more time to accumulate their points, but younger players have much higher ceilings for future achievement. Both factors are reflected in where players rank. But the biggest thing I wanted to mention is the point gap between Belmonte and Tackett. It is enormous, but it's pretty much accurate, and it pretty much reflects his dominance through this era. His 15 majors are 33% higher than anyone else's all-time total. His 7 Player of the Year awards are tied with the number 5 on this list, Walter Ray. The gap isn't really that arbitrary, and it's been earned through some separation from all of his colleagues. Sure, someone like Tackett might be just as dominant as Belmo was in his prime right now, but what about in 10 years? But there's another gap on this list that is huge as well. Tackett and Norm Duke. It shows just how much Tackett has accomplished in half the time. Duke had almost 25 full years to accumulate his points. Tackett joined the tour in 2012 and still compiled achievements that are so much higher than a lot of Hall of Fame careers. The gap isn't insignificant. It's about Tackett's incredible pacing with his achievements. And while yes, different point values would produce significantly different rankings, that's okay. If you valued Player of the Year at 10 instead of 15, some of the PBA players on this list that have won would tighten their gaps. And I think they chose these values because they produce some rankings that are generally matching the consensus of the community. Belmo first, Tackett second, Duke, Barnes, and Walter all at the top. The system passes the eye test when we're being mostly objective. You could try to create a peak value system that weights the best 5-year stretch. You could create an alternate era-adjusted system that accounts for varying tournament schedules like I tried to do for the GOAT debate. Each alternate would be defensible, but it would change the results and therefore probably invalidate this list a lot. And while you might not agree with the points system or the players that got ranked because of it, this is just a reasonable solution in a sea of many, many lists that could be made. And this probably isn't as offensive as some people would make if they also made this list and just made their top 10. And looking back at this list, there are some players who deserve way more recognition than they do in this list. For one, Mike Fagan. I called him out earlier, but he's in the honorable mentions because he stepped away pretty early on in his career. He has one of the best swings in all of PBA history. If he had stayed on the tour for 5 to 10 more years, he almost certainly would have cracked the top 25, if not the top 10. While it was sad to see him leave the tour, there's signs that he might be looking at coming back. He was recently seen at a Pro-Am a couple months back, but it doesn't really seem like he's planning on making a big return. Francois Lavoie also falls into this trap, and it also feels pretty low given his US Open rookie win. 2 televised 300 games and 3 total majors, but he's just 32 years old, and he's still accumulating his achievements with one of the best one-handed styles in the PBA. Give him another decade and his ranking will probably rise significantly, especially if he wins another US Open, which he seems to do quite often compared to everything else he's won. At the end of the day, he hasn't had a full career yet, so obviously his ranking won't be as accurate as some of the other people who bowled the full 25 years. But I don't really think that it's a bad thing to include a full 25-year span, because it does reward players like Chris Barnes, who bowled the full 20 to 25 years without complaining and with getting those top fives, those wins, those majors, and while it doesn't apply in his case specifically, the Player of the Year award. I mean, at the end of the day, this ranking gives us a new baseline for discussing the best players of the modern era. When someone new to bowling asks who the modern GOATs are, this list provides a somewhat legitimate answer backed by achievements rather than just pure opinion. Chris Barnes and Norm Duke being in the top 5 reflects their career of consistent championship level bowling across their whole careers, and that's worth celebrating for sure. It also acknowledges the dominant peaks that tend to last. Having Belmo and EJ at the top reflects their stretches of just total domination, where they clearly were the best bowlers in the world. And that point gap accurately represents how much they separated themselves from everyone else. It also rewards major champion success without making it the only thing that matters. Pete Weber with 4 majors at 11 feels just right, considering the fact that most of his career, if not a good amount, was before the year 2000. And considering how much someone like Anthony Simonson has been on TV, it's a bit surprising to me that he's ranked just 8th. But more importantly, this creates a conversation. We can debate whether majors should be worth more, or whether Player of the Year is overvalued, or whether peak matters more than longevity. But at the end of the day, we're debating from a framework that's at least transparent in how it's ranking, which is way better than how the subjective Hall of Fame voting is. And I think overall, this is a pretty good, well-constructed top 25 ranking to at least try to objectively measure player greatness. The point system could be altered in a way that would make Player of the Year less valuable and majors slightly more valuable, which could shake up the rankings quite a bit, but it's kind of well calibrated to what most people would probably expect. After all, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone is arguing that Belmo and Tackett would not be at the top, especially given what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years. The next tier of Duke, Barnes, Walter Ray, Tommy Jones, and Sean Rash all represent that sustained excellence. The inclusion of consistency metrics in that top 5 ranking rewards players like Chris Barnes, who just showed up day after day. But the system does have some downsides. For one, it cuts off at the year 2000, which affects players like Walter Ray and Jason Couch. If this list were purely based on their first 10 or last 10 years of bowling, these rankings would be quite a bit different. Even if it was the top 10 streaks of PBA wins, or like the best 10 years that a player had, this would be quite a bit different. But to be honest, I don't really think that this ranking will influence how many people view the PBA history going forward. When Hall of Fame discussions happen, these rankings might be referenced, but probably not. When we eventually have an eras debate later on in the future, probably in 10 years or so, when Belmo and EJ might be out of their primes, this will provide an at least statistical baseline for greatness. When someone asks who the greatest bowlers of the modern era were/are, at least now we have a somewhat objective answer. These 25 players. And overall, I think that's pretty valuable. At the end of the day, nothing's perfect, so of course it makes this system have flaws. But when you're trying to measure greatness over 25 years of a sport that's evolved as dramatically as bowling did, this was a pretty good ranking. But that's all I've got time for today. So leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. As I think I stated in the intro, if I didn't cut it out, I've been working on an explanation of the bowling Iceberg, which I've been working on. I posted most of what it is in the community tab, and I've added some suggestions from Reddit mainly, but pretty much it's finished, so I'm gonna start recording those soon. That video is going to be very long and going to take pretty much forever to edit, considering how much less editing goes into something like this, where I'm pretty much just yapping into a microphone with some bullet points in front of me, compared to a heavily scripted description of every single topic on an iceberg. I counted earlier, and I think I had 72 overall after everything was added. So yeah, it's probably going to be a longer video, probably upwards of an hour. But thank you guys so much for watching once again, and I'll see you guys next time.